Where we are is we have been going through Romans here for a few months, and we are now into chapter 13. We just finished chapter 12. If you remember chapter 12, he was urging us to live in love, to love one another. He was urging us to focus more on that, to leave the vengeance to God. Remember, that's, it's so bad because some of us, I feel as though that's our gifting. We could really help in that part of it. We'd love to tell people what's wrong with them and to punish them, but that's not our call. Now, what's interesting about that is now he transitions from that and he transitions into talking how our role kind of as Christians dealing with government. Yay, right? Taxes, woohoo, all of those fun things. And he goes through and he explains this. Now, normally, before I get into the message, I'll read a portion of Scripture, but I'm actually just going to try and get through the whole chapter today. So to save time, we'll get through the whole thing here. So I'm not going to pre-read it before we just go through it. So let's just jump into it. It starts like this in verse 13. He said, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God." So, what's he talking about here? And these next couple of verses here have caused some Christians to really, there's been some argument and discussion about it. So I'm going to say exactly what it means. No, just kidding. I don't, please know, when I say things like this or when we're trying to interpret stuff, I will give you what I think, what I've seen theologians talk and kind of where I lean. But if you disagree with it, it's okay. All right? We can still get along and be friends. But the first thing is, we do know that what he's talking about is he's talking to everyone because he says, let everyone be subject to governing authorities. Now, I think what is important is that first off, let's understand the context of what he's saying to the reader, correct? They did not live in a democracy. They did not live in the United States, America, okay? They were, the Israelites were under Roman occupation. And Rome ruled with a pretty heavy fist. And sometimes they had good leaders and sometimes they had bad leaders, or some people would say sometimes they had bad leaders and sometimes they had worse leaders, as far as, just evil, nasty guys. But some of them were a little more friendly than others. But at this time that he's writing, Paul's writing, there's some nasty guys in charge. So they're under this Roman rule. They have to be loyal to Rome. They have to pay taxes to Rome. They can't really do anything. You can't diss Caesar too much, and it gets a little weird because at this time now Caesar's starting to say, well, technically I'm a god, so it's okay. So they're not forcing them to worship them, but, if you diss Caesar, you're dissing their god, and it's another reason to throw you in with the lions. Now, the trick then with the Jewish Christian folk is not only are they a part of this minority Israelite group that's under oppression from Rome, but the Jewish Christians are also under oppression from the other Jews that aren't followers of Christ. In fact, they've got a real problem with, they don't think their Messiah is going to be a Messiah that's crucified on a cross. They think their Messiah is going to be a guy that comes in, he's going to take over and overthrow the government. If you remember the story of Jesus, remember there's times where he's performing miracles and doing things, and they think, oh, this is the Messiah, and they try to take him and make him, this military ruler, and he disappears. He kind of goes incognito mode, and he just kind of runs around, and they can't find him, and he disappears. Why? Because that's not what he did not come to do that. Okay. And so they don't think that that's the Messiah. So here you are, the Christian that are there, the Christians that are there, Jewish Christians that are, you're under oppression from Rome, and then you got the other Jews that don't like you as well, and they're kind of on you about all these different things, and it can be kind of like, how do we get along here? What Paul's answer to that is listen, we all need to be subject to the governing authorities, and he takes it further than that. He said there's no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Now, there's a few ways to read this. One is to say, every time there's any leader in place anywhere, that God handpicked that guy and put him there. And then if it's a bad leader, well, I guess then you were bad people, and that's the leader you deserve. then there is this idea that I tend to lean more towards is that he's created the systems. He's allowed the systems that exist for authority, for governors, governments, for kings, for whatever. He's allowed that to happen. And he's aware of it. God isn't like, oh, that's so weird. God's like, no, I know. This is going on. Because remember, at the time that he's writing this, imagine you've got a ruler that's actively like killing some of you. You think, well, so God put that dude in place? Well, I don't think he said, this is who we need so he can go and drive all my people crazy. As much as it's like this system, if I'm making any sense, I'm trying to say this as quickly as I can so I don't get stuck just here for 30 minutes. But these systems and the governments, is God's aware of that. And it's there, and he's okay with it. And yeah, there's times that there's some bad folks, which is why we want good folks in there. But as far as that system of how that works, right, it's kind of like you think of our political system, right? There's some of you who, if your guy gets in office as president, you're loving life, right? Things are great. If the other guy's candidate gets in office, you whine and complain for 4 years, right? But that same system still exists and still is in place. And so that's kind of this idea of, again, I'm not trying to say that God created the U.S. government, but what I'm saying is just kind of the overarching, the way their systems is in other words, there are going to be people who are in charge and who are going to make laws. And you're going to have to follow those laws or you get punished. And what Paul's saying is like, yeah, you're subject to those things. Now you could say, well, does that mean then that supersedes God's law? No, he's very clear about this. He discusses that in other points. You see it in Peter and John when they're discussing, and they say, we serve God higher. But it's not this idea of like, I only serve God and I could care less what the government tells me what to do. Okay? Paul's saying, hey, God's aware of those systems. I think he actually wants us to follow those. He's in that. He's honored when we honor our governments, which is tough to do if your dude ain't in charge. All right. He goes on to say, this interesting point. So Paul here is saying, honor government, and what does Jesus do? When Jesus was there, Pontius Pilate was around. That guy was obviously not a great dude either. When they asked Jesus, should we pay taxes? What did he say? Yeah. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's. When the authorities came to capture him unjustly, Peter goes and chops off the guy's ear. What does Jesus do? He says, put your sword away, picks up the ear, replaces the ear, as only the Son of God can do, and says, no, that's not what I didn't come to do this. See, he didn't come to overthrow this evil, nasty government. No. His plan is so much bigger than that. His plan is so much deeper than that. And this is what Paul's getting for. Remember, Paul's writing this whole book. He starts off by saying, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Let me tell you about this. That's his goal with all of this. It's gospel focused. So in that frame of mind, how do we respond to the government? You should follow the government. Well, if they tell me to go something against what God says, well, then tell them I'm sorry, I can't follow this. Because it goes against what God says. So it goes on to verse 2. He says, consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. He says, so don't rebel. You say, well, what? Wait a second. That's why we exist here as a nation. So is God not really like this because we rebelled against the king? Certainly some people that believe that. And if you believe that, then okay. We still get along. No, I don't believe that. I believe that there are times that when things are really unjust and we have a solution to take it, then we can do it. Keep in mind, you're talking about God's rule here. What does God want us to do? This is the same God who, when his people were under the oppression and slavery of Pharaoh, he sent Moses. And if you've ever seen Charlton Heston, he says, let my people go, right? And Pharaoh doesn't listen. He tried diplomacy, didn't work. So what does he do? Kicks up the heat a little bit, kicks up the heat a little bit, until all of a sudden the angel of death comes, wipes out a bunch of folks so that his people can be free. So God isn't against fighting for freedom. But this idea of just rebelling against everything, He's saying he doesn't want that. And it's tough, because if we don't agree with something, screw you. We don't want to give respect and honor someone who's in a place of authority. What Paul's saying is, like, chill out. That's not what it's about. We're not here to win the government. We're here to share love with other people. But he says, so don't just go about rebelling. So at the time, this was kind of a big thing, because people would rebel, and there'd be rebellions that pop up, and then Rome would strike it down. In fact, at this moment he's writing this, there is a rebellion brewing, which leads to the absolute destruction of Jerusalem. And Jesus even sees it coming. He's like, you see these amazing buildings, not one brick is going to stand on. This place is going to be completely destroyed. And because that's what happened out of that rebellion. So there is that attitude there, okay? And it's just kind of that thing of, he's like, that can't be your main thing. In fact, God's honored when you actually respect those in authority, which is tough to do. He goes on to explain this. He says, for rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one in authority? Then do what's right, and you'll be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. In other words, God is aware that governments are in place, and they're the ones who keep the laws, right, and the rules. And he's like, if you don't follow the rules, then that's going to stink for you. But they do help bring order, and they help bring peace in there. Doesn't mean we agree with everything they do, or that every person that's in charge does that well, but clearly he's saying that is a thing that government should do. So when our government tells you got to follow the laws, you're not listening to the laws, you have to pay the price, yeah, that's kind of biblical. Unless they're telling you can't worship God, and you can't, now we will rebel, as the church had to at that time. Remember, the guy who's writing this gets beheaded by the government. So he clearly says to follow and to get along, but yeah, if they push against something that God is saying, well, then at that point you have to follow God. That's just the way that is. But how do practically do you put that? Listen, if the speed limit says 55 and you are doing 85, 90, my guess is you probably would be driving, hopefully with a little bit of fear. But sometimes you don't, until all of a sudden you see that police officer, and what do we all do when we're on the highway and we see a police officer? We slow down. Man, we could be doing 3 miles per hour under the speed limit, and the first thing is to slow down. You're like, oh, wait, I guess I'm almost going too slow. Got to speed back up. Why? Because there's that fear of they are regulating. You could say, well, I don't believe in that. I think the speed limit should be whatever my car can do. Okay, but you're going to get arrested, and they're going to take your license. You do it too much, they're going to throw you in jail. You say, well, but I'm a Christian. I don't follow man's laws. Well, you're going to have to. They're going to make you. Okay? And that God is not honored in you being rebellious like that. We have to follow the laws that are there. We need to be good citizens. And kind of what Paul is saying in here. He says, therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. You should want to do the right thing. He says, this is also why you pay taxes. And I've checked and I've looked at the translations. Taxes really means taxes. I'm trying to find some loophole in there. Nope. Which is a great reminder as we're, 9 days away? Yay. Oh, goodness. You don't like taxes. And then, you go and you start your own business, right? So much my wife does, and she's, Miss Businesswoman, and business has grown and doing this, and all of a sudden you realize the government just wants more and more of that money. You ever do the math on the percentage you pay and realize how much of your year it was that you were just working for the government? It's depressing. Some of us are just finishing our work for the government, and now we can start making money ourselves. Starting from January 1st, we've just been working for them. Everything we get just goes straight to them. It's depressing. You say not to pay it? No, we have to pay it. Why? Because you'll get in trouble from them. And as a Christian, we should want to follow the laws as a matter of conscience. He says, give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. And if honor, then honor. In other words, if your person does not get into office, I know y'all, because I've been on the internets. The last thing we want to do is give any respect or honor. Why? Because we don't think that they've earned it. There is no condition here upon them earning it other than they hold the office. And as good Christians, we should respect that office. Doesn't mean you don't have to like them, or it doesn't mean you have to like them and love everything they're doing. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't, as your civic duty, push to try and get that person voted out and get someone else voted in. Yeah, right? Because remember, here in the United States, we are a part of the government. A government for the people, by the people. By the people, for the people. So we are a part of that. We can get involved in that. But watch that respect and that honor thing. You know, we all joke and do whatever. But if really at your core, I don't care what that person does. And some of us, we start thinking, if our candidate gets in office, well, yeah, then God clearly put him in office. And if that person doesn't get in there, well, the devil put that person. So you think God's just forgetting to, oh, shoot, I forgot to vote that day. No. What Paul's saying is like, it doesn't matter who's in there. There needs to be a level of respect that is due to them. Then give it. Respect of honor that is due to them. Then honor them. Paul's got such a way of just saying the wrong thing sometimes, because that's not what we want to do. In a democracy, we understand that there is a sense in which we are that government. We are a part of that process. So yes, be a part of that process. Do your civic duty. Vote how you need to vote. Man, if you don't think there's any good candidate you want to run. You know, I don't want to do that. It seems like a lot of pressure. Gotta take a lot of garbage there. But go for it. Get involved in that. And then he jumps out of, so he was talking about love, right? And then had to throw the government in there about how that love carries over and should play in our relationship with those in authorities. And now he jumps right back to love again. See, in his mind, everything that he's just saying there, this is all connected. He says in verse 8, let no debt remain outstanding except for the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves one another has fulfilled the law. The commandments, like you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summed up in this one command. And he quotes Jesus. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. So on a personal level, the only debt we are to carry is the debt to love the other person. It's this perpetual obligation. It just keeps going over and over again. We need to love. We need to love. And loving your neighbor, you know, I say this again and again, and I'm going to keep saying it because Paul keeps saying it. And you say, well, who's my neighbor? It's a real person. Because listen, it's easy to love our neighbor in the theoretical, right? In the abstract, in the idea of it. Yes, I love that. And then you look at your neighbors and say, well, obviously not these people. But really, I think God really wants me to love, in my mind, those kind of people. Yes, I want to love those kind of people. And you pray, God, get me away from these people so I can really be by these people that I can love. And he's saying, no, I have you there in that situation to love those people. Ugh. But it's tough to do. But this is how we fulfill the law. You know, this is one of the wonderful things about, that I think about marriage. Is it forces you to really practice this. Because there's a time, you two can't get enough of each other. We're saying, we're trying to keep you apart, trying not to get you to fornicate, and then, get you married, get together, and you go and love and life. And then all of a sudden life just hits and we're not sure what to do and kind of go on autopilot. And all of a sudden you realize, well, I mean, I kind of knew he was a little bit of a slob, but he's never picked up his underwear. When is he going to start picking up his underwear? Maybe when you lay him down, when he moves on to the next life, He's not going to change that? Well, she's like this now. And we get into these things. And all of a sudden you get these so close to these people. They're so close to your life. And you know all the little things that are wrong with them. And, you just like to poke them. Tell them what's wrong with them. Tell them what's wrong with them. And sometimes it gets tough to love those people. But it's such a great thing that God gives us to really practice loving one another. And we got to work on that. And we practice it there. And it's doing no harm, which is tough. Because the closer we are to people, we're just uniquely gifted to bring harm to them. Right? Because you know all their buttons, all their little things. And you see the line. You know where the line is. And you tiptoe up to it. And then you say something like, you sound an awful lot like your mother. Right? Step across that line, poking the bear, And then they respond, oh, look at how you responded. Oh, come on. You know where that line is. All those you who are married, you know where the line is. Please stay behind the line. Okay? Stay behind. It's tough to do. You say, but he's driving me crazy today. What should I say to him? Well, I mean, again, depending on what it is, because there's always levels in this and that. But if it's just your basic everyday annoyance, just say, hi, honey, love you. But doesn't he need to know he's annoying me? Maybe not. So I can't ever say anything. Of course, you can say things and you get in and, you have to fight through things to figure it out. But in the fights, you guys know when you're pulling hair and hitting below the belt. Don't do that. Okay? Remember, love honors one another. So all those people in your life, you need to love them. That's the way we fulfill all of this stuff. And then he gives us this final reminder that the day is coming near. He says this in verse 11, do this understanding that in the present time, the hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over, the day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness. Let us put on the armor of light. Let us behave decently, as in the daytime, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality, not in debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy. Rather, clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. I love this how he says in the beginning here to wake up. Hey, wake up. I think often as Christians we kind of fall asleep at the wheel. It's easy to do. And if you know anything about being asleep, do you know anyone who's like a sleepwalker in your life? It's creepy, isn't it? Yeah. We have one child. I won't point them out to embarrass them. But they have done some sleepwalking before. And their siblings have found them, and they said it was very unnerving because it looks like a little zombie. Why are you awake? And they just stare at you. And then they'll go, and you're like, go to bed. Then you got to take them and put them back to bed, and they go back to bed, and you're like, that was creepy. But you can do some things while you're still asleep. I had a friend, he was pretty, actually, his parents had to keep an eye on him because once he was such an active sleepwalker that they found him outside in the middle of the night. He had just gone outside into the shed, grabbed the chainsaw, and he was going out to cut down a tree, apparently. He's asleep. Had to wake him up. So he tells us this story because we're all kind of going on this trip, and I was like the adult youth chaperone. I mean, I was 18, hey. But so I was in this room with these boys, and there was 10 of us in this hotel room just all crammed in there. And then this one kid, hey, sometimes, I talk in my sleep, or I might get up and walk around or something, just, wake me up. Blah, blah. He really undersold it. because I was awoken at about 2:30 in the morning to just at the top of his lungs screaming. And then the guy next to him who was sleeping wakes up and is freaked out, doesn't know what to do. The guy standing there with his arms in the air, he just tackles that guy. And then he's screaming. And then the guy who was screaming wakes up from his screaming to hear the other guy screaming, tackling him, punching him, going, stop. Like, we had to like pull the two of them apart. And they were both like, what happened? What happened? And he goes, oh, sorry. Was I talking in my sleep? No, you weren't talking in your sleep, but you were screaming at the top of your lungs as though you were on fire. And the other kid was just like, I didn't know what to do. So you started to tackle him and start hitting him? I don't know. So anyway, it was an interesting thing. But when we're asleep, we can make it look like we're still doing stuff. We're going through as Christians. We're kind of living our Christian life, just sort of in the motions. But you're not awake. You know, to truly love one another, you need to wake up. You need to realize our time here on earth is short. And it's not something we'll get to that eventually. Well, eventually maybe I'll get there. I'll do this or that. It's we start the journey now. Let's wake up now. And as he says, he's like, put on Jesus. In other words, live like he lived. Try and figure out how he lived, the things he did. Put that on, this armor of light. You know, stop doing all the debauchery and all the other stuff and just living for yourselves. Let's stop that. The clock's ticking. Come on, let's wake up. Let's get serious about this. And this speaks as true to us today because it's easy to fall asleep at the wheel, isn't it? You just kind of go through your day and you're doing pretty well, you know? But you just kind of, you know, hopefully nothing pops up, an obstacle pops up, but you're kind of on autopilot going forward. You're just kind of doing stuff you need to do, but you're avoiding things in your life that maybe God's trying to talk to you about. And he kind of pokes at it and you think you need to do something. You're like, no, I don't want to wake up. You hit the snooze button on it. Hey, listen, you need to stop doing that. I know. You hit the snooze button on it. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. We need to wake up. If you're here, you're a husband and a wife, and you feel like you've been hitting the snooze button on your marriage, wake up. You think that, you know, you're a parent, a mother, or a father, and you've got kids, and and you keep hitting the snooze button. And that goes fast, doesn't it? Those of you got kids growing out of the house, that went fast. When you were in it, you thought it was never going to end. Right? And you know what happens? You get through that tough part, right? When they're little babies and they need you to like live, right? So you're there, you're keeping them alive, you're teaching them how to be like normal human beings, and then eventually you get them to where like they can kind of take care of themselves and function, and you kind of just go, oh, thank goodness, and then you stop. We need to parent through that as well. You know, it's fun. It's kind of fun, especially as a dad. You know, when they're young, they just kind of need mom all the time. You're just there to have fun and to lay down the law if mom needs you to. But it's fun. They get older to start teaching them, like, I need to try and teach you how to be an adult. And we don't always know what to do or what to say. I'm sure there's conversations I've had with my boys that they thought, what the heck did Dad just say? And just kind of like, okay, Dad, cool, walk away. But I'm sure there's probably times too where it was like, yeah, that was helpful. I needed to hear that. It's easy to fall asleep at that, and all of a sudden, 4 years, like, whoa, what? You're done? You're at the house? Do you know how to live? Are you an adult? So don't fall asleep there. You got people in your life, in your job, things that God might be poking you. Hey, go chat with him. Hey, you should be a little bit more like this. Hey, you shouldn't be so much like that. And we just keep hitting the snooze button, Let's not do that anymore. Let's wake up. Amen.